Yeah, it's my honor to be here. And I was honored when I made the phone call and Walt answered. This kind gentleman spoke with me for about half an hour on the phone. I understand that's a very rare occurrence, so I it's my first time here. I've come to Florence many times with my children, stopped in at Moe's and so forth, and driven by the fellowship. This is my first time stepping in, and it's an honor to be here. You have a warm community. And I love the way you kind of intermingle your own particularness with UU values. I love the interweaving of the principles, but not just a statement of the principles, but other values kind of there, and intermingled with art and this, and your practice of sharing with stones in the water, and all that. It's really quite nice, so it's an honor to be here. Yeah, and it's been my honor to serve as a hospice chaplain for 6 years, ministering to people with a wide range of beliefs. That has been very helpful to me. It can be easy in Unitarian Universalism to be kind of encapsulated and to have judgments, despite our principles, about people from different faith traditions, people who vote differently than the majority of UUs and so forth. And it's been such an honor and so helpful for me to have the honor of being welcomed into people's homes and being with them and their parents and so forth as they're dying. People from very different. So it's broadened me and helped me be more true to UU values, actually, and realizing where I've had my own prejudices, really. But long before I heard the words Unitarian or Universalist, and probably before I understood what a chaplain was, I was reading J.R.R. Tolkien's, I've learned the correct pronunciation is Tolkien's, The Lord of the Rings. The first time I read them was in the 5th or 6th grade. I'd read them all through 5 times by the end of high school, another time in my 20s, I think maybe even another time in my 30s, I've kind of lost count. My favorite bookshelf at home contains Bibles next to Tolkien's books and books about Tolkien's books. When the movies came out, I saw them multiple times, of course. As a purist, I had my critiques, but I actually was impressed with a number of things about them. And I saw them with my similarly Tolkien-obsessed siblings. I'm the youngest in a large family, on the days following Christmas. And for Christmas one year, I purchased, as stocking stuffers, I wish I still had one, for my siblings, my nephews and nieces, light-up chalices for about $2 each at Burger King with the purchase. Great bargain. Went to Burger King enough to get about 12 of them. So somehow those didn't make the cross-country move with me from Rhode Island, so I can't light up a chalice for you this morning. So this is the nutcase you've invited to your pulpit this morning. Frequents fast food on occasion and so forth, and as Walt said himself, you can blame him if you don't like it. So thank you for having me here this morning. In this sermon, I will turn to the wisdom of Gandalf the Wizard, and particularly to a well-known passage that was used verbatim, I believe, in the movie, The Fellowship of the Ring. They placed it different in the story, but that's fine. This mini-sermon of Gandalf spoke to our American predicament when I first preached on it in the year following 9/11. When I was back east in Rhode Island, and 9/11 made a bigger impact, I think, there than perhaps it did out here. Prior to the Second Iraq War, it speaks as well to our current situation in the Trump era. But before I get to Gandalf's particular message, a summary of the story may be necessary for those of you who, for whatever reason, do not know it. The Lord of the Rings, as you probably know, is a fantasy world set in a fantasy world called Middle-earth, which is a little like medieval Europe, but is infused with magic and populated by horrible monsters, as well as races of creatures friendly to human beings and magic. This includes, of course, hobbits, who are 3 feet tall, have large, hairy feet, and enjoy the simple things of life, including food, drink, pipe weed, not the kind recently legalized in Oregon, and laughter.
11 seasons.
Pardon?
11 seasons. Yeah,
11 seasons.
11. Oh, the 11 seasons, right.
Yeah.
That's right. Hobbits are not at all inclined to travel and adventure, which means, of course, that those in a story will do plenty of both. In the book The Hobbit, the prelude to The Lord of the Rings, a magical ring is found by the hobbit Bilbo in a cave, having slipped off the finger of its former owner, the gangrel creature Gollum. Bilbo uses the magical power of the ring, invisibility, to escape Gollum. But he refrains from using its power to surprise and kill Gollum, even though Gollum was trying to kill Bilbo and blocking his exit. At the beginning of The Lord of the Rings, the now elderly Bilbo passes on the ring to his nephew, Frodo. The wizard Gandalf, a close friend of Bilbo and Frodo, discovers that this ring is no ordinary magic ring. It is the One Ring, created by the Dark Lord Sauron, from whom it was taken thousands of years ago. If Sauron, the Dark Lord, finds it again, he will regain sufficient power to take over Middle-earth. Interestingly, the ring itself has a sort of consciousness, or at least will, trying to get back to its maker, Sauron, in part by inflating any sense of selfishness, lust for power, or other tendencies towards evil in its current bearer. The ring is a sort of character in the movies with its own theme music. The servants of Sauron, searching high and low for this missing ring, capture and torture Gollum until he reveals that the ring went on to a hobbit named Baggins who lives in the Shire. Maybe if you saw the movie, you remember him just hearing, "Shire! Baggins!" You know. This is not a good turn of events if you happen to be a hobbit named Baggins living in the Shire. So when Frodo learns from Gandalf this news that Sauron is now hot on his trail, naturally he panics. Frodo says, "But this is terrible, far worse than the worst that I imagined from your hints and warnings. O Gandalf, best of friends, what am I to do? For now I am really afraid. What a pity that Bilbo did not stab that vile creature, Gollum, when he had a chance." Gandalf replies, "Pity? It was pity that stayed his hand. Pity and mercy, not to strike without need. And he has been well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from the evil and escaped in the end, because he began his ownership of the ring so, with pity." Frodo says, "I am sorry, but I am frightened, and I do not feel any pity for Gollum." "You have not seen him," Gandalf says. "No, and I don't want to," Frodo replies. "I can't understand you. Do you mean to say that you have let him live on after all those horrible deeds?" Gandalf actually captured Gollum at one time. "Now, at any rate, he is as bad as an orc and just an enemy. He deserves death." Here Gandalf replies with one of the most memorable passages in the books. "Deserves it? I dare say he does. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then do not be too eager to deal out death and judgment, for even the very wise cannot see all ends. I have not much hope that Gollum can be cured before he dies, but there is a chance of it, and he is bound up with the fate of the ring. My heart tells me that he has some part to play yet, for good or ill, before the end, and when that comes, the pity of Bilbo may rule the fate of many, yours not the least." End quote. In this passage, when Frodo wonders why Bilbo didn't kill Gollum, he is thinking in a logic familiar to us. Remove the threat by violence if necessary. Whatever his origins, Gollum has become a murderous villain. But Gandalf reminds Frodo that we can never know all the effects of our actions. Even the wise cannot see all ends. We may think that killing a hateful and dangerous person removes a threat and is therefore good, but we don't know that. We tend to think in terms of linear causality. X causes Y, which causes Z. But reality isn't so neat. I don't believe that anything happens without multiple causes. And cause and effect is not a one-way equation. When we change something else, or allow it to be unchanged, we are also affected. The Buddhist concept of dependent co-arising describes this. I invite you now to think for a significant change in your life, really. Some of you mentioned moving here. Could be a loss or a death, a divorce, birth, any significant change. Was it caused by just one person or force? What conditions enabled the change? Did it have significant, unexpected consequences for others or yourself? Our stories unfold in a more complex manner than we may refashion them in memory. A woman comes to church looking for community while she sorts out her career and finds in her church volunteer work a springboard to her new vocation. A man follows his partner to a new home. They break up, and he finds himself settling happily into his new home while the former partner who wanted to move there moves away. Life rarely turns out as we plan. And thank God, it's more of an adventure that way. So, shall we go on our merry way, walking and talking and eating and drinking like hobbits, or like Winnie the Pooh without a plan? Well, some people do seem to live this way. Charmed lives, many of them. Most of us, and I think particularly Unitarian Universalists, for better or for worse, have ambition. If not specific goals, then a strong sense of wanting to grow into a better person and contribute something positive to our communities. Most of us want to live somewhere in between the lives of a carefree hobbit and a goal-driven, controlling superachiever. And for us, Gandalf can be a guide. He explains to Frodo that Bilbo's mercy and pity towards Gollum had an unexpected consequence for Bilbo. It made him more resilient to the evil power of the ring. And Gandalf goes on to describe his feeling that the pity of Bilbo would send ripples of influence outward to Frodo and to the fate of the mission, which of course it does. I hear underneath Gandalf's words a philosophy that we can apply to our lives. While goals may be important, put equal, if not greater weight on the character of our words and actions. We may think that we may use Sauron's ring against him and not create an even greater evil in the Dark Lord's place. But it doesn't work that way. The ring, which represents an evil power, not just invisibility, which kind of is a symbol for lack of accountability, a tool for thievery, but the ring also represents power over others. This ring cannot be used without unintended consequences that are in the nature of the ring. That is why, in the story, Gandalf won't even touch the ring himself. And he trusts as his bearer not the noble ranger guardian and future king, Aragorn, nor any noble thousands of years old elf, but a simple hobbit who does not lust after power. Even the wise cannot see all ends. Put your trust in character. Put your trust in friendship. Put your trust in what life has already presented to you. The hobbit has the ring. We get ourselves into trouble when we presume to know with certainty the effects of our actions and we guide ourselves by these effects. For life has a way of surprising us, of bringing to center stage characters we thought peripheral if we thought of them at all. So I'm shifting our focus now from the personal to the political. I wondered what it would be like if U.S. foreign policy were guided with a respect, like Gandalf's, for the full weight of our actions, particularly their unintended consequences. During the 1980s, our government covertly supported Afghan guerrillas against the Soviets, intending to thwart the spread of communism. I specifically remembered one of my best friend's father talking about this, being so great Americans was doing something kind of sneaky to keep the spread of communism. Mission achieved, right? The USSR was not able to take over Afghanistan. But the unintended consequences? We gave the Afghan guerrillas weapons and training. We gave them the ring. Later, they decided to use it against us. Even the wise cannot foresee all ends. A few years later, Saddam Hussein looked like the United States' best ally against Iranian Islamic fundamentalism. Judging him a modern secular ally, we supported him against others. Kept the war going with Iran. Even the wise cannot foresee all ends. Still later, we invaded Iraq, supposedly to remove a nuclear threat. We created chaos, fed anti-Americanism, and a recruiting ground for ISIS. The human suffering in that region is tremendous, so much of it really, truly unleashed by the chaos that we caused. Maybe the wise should be getting a clue about now. Violence begets violence. The gun, once given or sold, can point in any direction. Our military and economic might intoxicates us like the ring, leading us to believe that we can control the future as if we were the hand moving pieces on a chessboard. Certainly, our government, like each of us, can influence the future, but rarely do events materialize as we imagine. When the United States government was deciding whether or not to support Afghani guerrillas against the Soviets, when the equivalent of the Security Council was meeting then, we've seen so many pictures of them, they didn't weigh the chance of a future terrorist attack on U.S. soil. It wasn't even discussed, I'm sure of it. When small government, mainstream Republicans decided to broaden their appeal to people's more base instincts and with identity politics, particularly with an African-American president in office for the first time, they most certainly did not foresee their party quickly becoming overtaken by the leader of a new populism whose policies are creating skyrocketing federal deficits, not exactly Republican ideals, and whose personal morality and means of doing business are something the now former establishment Republicans find repugnant. It's hard for me to believe that this week's announcement by Paul Ryan that he will be stepping down from the House of Representatives when his term ends is merely for personal reasons. Another angle for this, though. In the 1980s, when liberal college students, possibly following their professors' examples, started labeling some ideas politically correct and others not politically correct, they probably did not foresee this language contributions to the tribal warfare that is our political discourse today. I was a liberal college student when I first heard the language in either 1989 or 1990. And even though I was generally a liberal and agreed with what the specific policies my friend was talking about, when I first heard this language, politically correct, my gut response was, that's fascism. We're in an institution of higher learning. Why are we talking about politically correct? It's not a surprise to me that universities are increasingly being viewed as places that don't so much unleash minds, encourage a passion for learning, and teaching critical thinking skills, as they are viewed as places teaching what to think and what you can dare to say out loud or not. Please don't misunderstand. I'm not laying all of our tribal warfare, unleashed racism and xenophobia on the doorstep of liberals. But I am saying everyone has made and is making contributions to this mess, this dumpster fire that our country is in right now. Seriously. And let's clean up our own side of the street. Unintended consequences are not entirely unpredictable. Violence produces more violence. Restrictiveness, like politically correct, produces rebellion. Chaos begets chaos. Consistency breeds confidence. Mercy begets mercy. Love releases love. Courage inspires courage. 50 years after the death of Martin Luther King, let us not forget that. This is what he talked about, and this is what he lived. His love was a fearless love. The night before, he was gunned down, not for his dream of white and black children playing together or equal racial relations, but for his economic views. He knew his time was coming soon. It was his stance against the triple evils, as he called them, the intertwined and reinforced evils of racism, economic exploitation, and war that got him killed. And it's also important to remember that his public approval rating at that time was in the 30s, lower than Trump's today. He's only popular in hindsight and when we have a somewhat more sanitized view of him. It's a sermon for a different day. But I do want to put out there is a poor people's campaign that's happening in this world now, this year. So rather than just celebrate the man, we can honor his legacy. Back to Gandalf. It might be easy for you to see what kind of light Gandalf's message might shed on the tone and character of President Trump's actions. For instance, international relations. Dismissal of the worth of other countries in base terms. Dismissal of international relationships, the need for a State Department, for instance. Dismissal of international human rights law. These are likely to produce, inevitably, disrespect and disregard for the United States as well. Less help coming our way when we need it, and our former trading partners turning to China. Reckless, bullying tweets from the Commander-in-Chief and President of our country gives permission for further reckless, bullying behavior in our political and social life, in all directions, even on our children's playgrounds. Perhaps you can or have already come up with your own examples. But my challenge to you today is to apply the law of unintended consequences, the importance of the character of our actions, to yourself as an individual, to the groups you align with, and to us all as members of American society. This is what we just sang about. Though I may speak with bravest fire, and have a gift to all inspire, and have not love, my words are vain, as sounding brass and hopeless gain. Though I may go to every march and stand on the right side, I'm making this up as I go along, I really didn't write that, of every cause, but I am righteous and think I'm so much better than the people on the other side. I'm contributing nothing. So, now, in that hymn, notice that the first two verses are warnings against the empty outcomes of our good deeds if they are not done with a loving heart. Only after two verses of warnings do the hymnists believe that we are ready then for the concluding prayer. Come, Spirit, come, our hearts control. Our spirits long to be made whole. Let inward love guide every deed. By this we worship and are freed. Wow. When we pray for our hearts to be controlled, we are freed. Interesting. The implicit curriculum of this hymn is that we have to work first really hard, doubly hard, at noticing our own tendencies towards pride and other sins before becoming open to a guiding grace. So in that spirit, I ask you to consider, what does it really mean to let inward love guide every deed in our everyday lives and in our current political climate? What are some of the specific ways in which you are not doing this, in which we are not doing this? Are you speaking with bravest fires or marching for the just cause with any degree of moral superiority in your heart? In a time of polarization and tribalism, where do you find yourself reinforcing those tendencies? Is your faith community a tribe? If someone walked in today with a Make America Great baseball hat on, chewing tobacco, and wearing an NRA t-shirt, how would you greet that person? Seriously, this is a serious question. What kind of looks would you exchange with your friends? Why would you be exchanging those looks? To make your bonds as not that stronger. The same thing teenagers do. We do it as adults too. It's playing out with devastating consequences in our country right now. The tendency to tribalism. So if you are anti-Trump, try imagining Trump supporters listening to your conversations, even your private ones, or reading your social media posts. Would they become more open to your views? Or more hardened in theirs, particularly in feeling misunderstood and disrespected by liberal elites? This is the part of the story that being in the homes of hospice patients has helped me see. It's real. It may seem silly to suppose that the tone of one's private conversations with friends about supporters of the other side would have any effect on anything. But everything we say, do, and how we say it, especially, or do it, has its effects. Most immediately has an effect on ourselves. How hardened in our views we are. How tribal we are being. How much deep in our hearts, while we may say we want unity, some part of us actually wants division, enjoys it, because it gives us a sense of identity and purpose and cohesion for our social groups. Doesn't matter how many degrees you have, we're not above these base human instincts. Our hymn this morning is about this level of self-examination and purification because our motives matter and they can be hard for us to see. To be a spiritual person is to be constantly shedding our illusions of separateness and welcoming the reality of our unity with all. Not just the trees, but the person I described coming in the door. This is the religious underpinning of our seventh principle, the respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. This does not say, as is sometimes translated, we care for the earth, although that is a very important derivative of the principle. The seventh principle is a statement of interdependence. It is a religious statement, using the metaphor of the web. On the interdependent web, nobody can predict all of the ripples of our movements. Even the wise cannot see all ends. Even our small acts of kindness and openness, even our thoughts, can have ripples of influence. So when we take a stand for justice, truth, peace, our beloved earth, or as I feel we will need to take a stand in the coming weeks for our Constitution, let's do so in a way that affirms our unity and is not motivated on any level by a sense of tribalism. A simple test I find helpful. When we show up at a rally for our cause, Do we dress in a way that reinforces the social identity of your group or expands it? Are you comfortable dressing conservatively to your liberal rally or vice versa? Are you there to signal that you belong to the social group, or are you there to stretch the group's belonging message to include all Americans or all people? Gandalf the Grey is mocked by his fellow wizard Saruman the White for cavorting with hobbits in the Shire, learning their simple ways of eating, drinking, smoking, and laughing with them. Saruman is a more purpose-driven wizard, spending his precious time and thoughts only on important matters. But in the Shire, perhaps on his days off, Gandalf found the people who would achieve his highest purposes. They had neither great intelligence nor great strength. What they had was character. They knew themselves and their values. They had hobbit sense, humor, humility, loyalty, inner strength, and kindness. They never let any goals compromise those qualities. I have to make a note. The movies makes the hobbits much more directive in their power. In the books, for instance, when Merry and Pippin kind of inspire the tree ents to come to the aid, it's their character that does it, spending time with them, that evokes old memories and brings them to it. This is one place where the movies kind of got it wrong. They made the hobbits more traditional, will-oriented heroes, not as obviously their character, inspiring things kind of just happening. So the hobbits were the kind of people who lived charmed lives, or are in the stories, because life or God or spirit has a way of cooperating with those who are truly true to their best nature and gracious to others. Graciousness begets grace, and so may it be for us. God bless America, our beautiful earth, and all who depend on it, and every nation. Blessed be and amen.
Amen.